A foreigner can buy a house in Vietnam, but there is something surprising. They cannot own the land underneath it. In many countries, buying a house means owning the land. So why does Vietnam separate these two rights? And what does this actually mean for foreigners buying property in Vietnam? This is Lex Viet. We go beyond the headlines to uncover how Vietnam really works, through law, business, and culture. From hidden rules to changing markets, we explain the systems shaping Vietnam today. This is Vietnam Beyond the Headlines. Vietnam has become one of Asia's most attractive destinations for investors, entrepreneurs, and people looking for a new place to live. But one of the biggest mistakes foreigners make is assuming Vietnam works like my country. It does not, and property ownership is one of the clearest examples. So can foreigners buy property in Vietnam? The answer is yes. Under Vietnam's housing law, certain foreign individuals and organizations are permitted to own residential houses in Vietnam, subject to applicable conditions. Foreign individuals who are legally permitted to enter Vietnam may own residential houses through lawful transactions, including purchasing houses, entering into lease purchase agreements, or receiving houses as gifts or inheritance in cases permitted by Vietnamese law. Foreign organizations may also own residential houses in Vietnam through forms permitted by law, subject to specific legal requirements. However, there is one important distinction. Foreigners can own the house, but they generally do not own the land itself. To understand why Vietnam separates these two rights, we first need to understand how Vietnam's land system works. In Vietnam, land is not privately owned by individuals or companies in the same way as in many other countries. Under Vietnam's constitution and land law, land belongs to the entire people, and the state represents the owner and manages land on behalf of the people. This means Vietnam does not recognize private land ownership in the traditional sense. Instead, the legal concept is land use rights. Land use rights give holders certain legal rights, including the ability to use, transfer, lease, inherit, or mortgage those rights depending on the conditions provided by law. So when Vietnamese people say, "I own this land," the legal meaning is usually, "I hold the land use rights over this land." This is one of the first concepts foreigners need to understand when entering Vietnam's property market. So what happens when a foreigner buys an apartment in Vietnam? They own the apartment. They have ownership rights over the residential property they purchase, but the land underneath the building remains governed by Vietnam's land system. This difference is why buying property in Vietnam is not exactly the same as buying property in many other countries. But there is another important point many foreigners do not know. Foreign ownership of residential property in Vietnam is generally not permanent. Another important question is, how long can foreigners own residential property in Vietnam? The answer depends on who the owner is. A foreign individual may own residential housing through purchase, lease purchase, gift, or inheritance transactions. Such ownership is generally limited to a term of 50 years from the date of issuance of the certificate of ownership. If the owner wishes to continue such ownership, an extension of the ownership term may be requested in accordance with the regulations of the Vietnamese government. The ownership term must be specified in the certificate of ownership. For foreign organizations, the ownership period is different. Their ownership period generally cannot exceed the term stated in their investment-related documents, including any approved extensions. The ownership period is calculated from the date the organization is granted the relevant certificate and must be recorded accordingly. Before the ownership period expires, the owner may transfer or gift the property to persons who are legally allowed to own housing in Vietnam. If the ownership period expires and the owner does not transfer the property according to the law, the property may be handled in accordance with Vietnamese regulations. There is an important exception. If a foreign individual is married to a Vietnamese citizen or an overseas Vietnamese person who has long-term housing ownership rights, they may enjoy housing ownership rights similar to Vietnamese citizens. This means they may have stable and long-term ownership rights, rather than the standard 50-year limitation. Vietnam also places limits on foreign ownership of residential property. For example, in an apartment building, foreign ownership is generally limited to 30% of the total apartments in that building. For villas and individual houses, such as townhouses, there are also restrictions depending on the location and applicable regulations. These rules reflect Vietnam's approach to managing housing resources, urban planning, and development. For foreigners, the biggest lesson is this: do not approach Vietnam using only the assumptions from your home country. The question is not simply, can I buy property in Vietnam? The better question is, what legal structure allows me to achieve my goal in Vietnam? Whether you want to live, invest, or build a business, understanding the legal framework is the first step. In our next video, we explore another important question: how do foreigners actually invest in Vietnam's real estate market? This is LexViet, helping you understand Vietnam through law, business, and culture. This is Vietnam beyond the headlines.